Welcome to Inforce. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us and working with us in this interesting format. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here for our first security conference. It's great to see you and it's great to spend time with you. And thank you for being here in this session. Hopefully you'll find it helpful and we'll do what we can to try and make it as informative as possible. My name is Sam Elmalak. I'm a worldwide enterprise tech leader for Enterprise Greenfield. And for the last 3 years or so, we've been working on defining account strategy and defining an approach for helping our customers build out their AWS environment. We've started to call it Landing Zone, and I'll make sure that as part of this session, we clarify what's lowercase landing zone, uppercase landing zone, control tower, AMS. I'm hoping that by the end of this session, you'll be slightly less confused about all the stuff that we have out there. Before I start, by a show of hands, how many people have seen this before? Okay? How many people are tired of seeing this and hearing explanations of what it actually is? So the 4 of you can listen to the music for the next 15 minutes or so. I'll give you a high-level overview of this, and then we'll go from there. So we'll talk about what's a landing zone, lowercase landing zone, uppercase landing zone. What does it take to implement it? The services that it takes, whether it's AWS Landing Zone or Control Tower. We'll think about one versus the other. When do I use Landing Zone? When do I use Control Tower? AMS, the managed services, and how the whole big picture fits together. And at the very end, you also get to help me define what the next set of guidance and things that we're planning to put out there for you are. What are the areas? We've got a list of things that we're thinking through. Customers just want to get things done. I want to release new products, but I want to make sure they're secure. I want to be able to move fast, but I want to make sure that operationally I'm resilient. And given that this is a security conference, we'll focus more on the security side of it. What if every single developer or every single application can launch applications and be ready to go, and you as a security practitioner don't have to worry about them doing the wrong thing? And if they do, it's at least isolated, and the blast radius is small enough that it's minimal risk overall, so they can move forward and go and launch new product and services. That's the core idea behind building a landing zone. And the multi-account strategy guidance and everything we've been putting together has been driven out of the security organization within AWS based on the collective best practices. But how do we do that? How do we stay scalable, resilient, while we're still compliant, and make sure we're still able to adapt? What we've come to, at least at AWS, is you need a landing zone. Not to be confused by the AWS Landing Zone solution, this is just the place that helps you launch products and services, or get them to take off if you're thinking of a landing zone. It's an environment that's pre-configured, allows you to use multiple accounts, and it's a starting point for development. An account in of itself is not special in that, other than it provides us this container that's a level of isolation. It happens to be that within AWS, that is the best way to truly isolate resources. So when you're thinking about it from a mental model, all we're looking at is a way for us to be able to isolate resources and accounts so that users can go and do things, and if they break something, if they download an insecure open source product, or if they leak credentials, the blast radius is limited. It just so happens that an account is the best way we at AWS have for achieving that. And if I can get everybody to be able to just launch something and know that what they're doing is not going to impact others, and that if they do have a security leak or something goes wrong, it's isolated to that, it allows me to build things more comfortably. It allows me to be able to feel safe, well, relatively safe and secure, because knowing most security practitioner, there is no such thing as safe, but we'll get there. So, the lowercase landing zone It's a pre-configured environment for your presence. It's scalable and flexible. We decided that we've been telling you this guidance since 2016. Set up accounts, put core, put shared services, and earlier in 2018 rather, we launched an implementation of that practice. We called it the AWS Landing Zone solution. Yesterday, we launched AWS Control Tower, which, by the way, they're doing a session there, but don't leave mine to go listen to theirs. They're doing it again later. Control Tower is taking the same practices and things that we've done in the AWS Landing Zone solution, implementing it as a managed service. And a little bit later, we'll talk about decision points. How do you pick one versus the other? Or do you use both? So we've talked a little bit about this. An account is the highest level of isolation, lets me do things like my security boundary, my API limits, throttling, billing separation. It is the only true way to separate things within AWS's environment. In fact, if I set up an account and you set one up, that level of isolation and separation is the same as if you set up two separate accounts, or you're then within the same company. So it helps us provide that approach. Most times customers start with one. You can start with one and play with it. So if you're a new company starting out, or just a person, start with one account, play, learn, figure stuff out. What people soon realize is one account doesn't give them the level of isolation they want, and things start to get a bit messy. I was talking to a CISO once, and he said, well, of course you'd recommend all of this because it means we pay you more money. So for those of you who don't know, accounts are free. VPCs are free. IAM users are free. So you can set up 1,000 accounts or one account. It's all free until you start launching resources. The intention is to help you build things that are isolated. On the other end of the spectrum, we have customers that are moving toward thousands of accounts. Many customers have that today. But when you start going toward that model, it's the aggregation problem. How do I bring everything together? How do I know what's going on across the board? Many customers are somewhere in between. But my personal goal, and to a certain extent, as we see this journey happening over the last few years, customers are more and more moving toward a lot of accounts because they provide a really good level of isolation. One might not be enough because you might have multiple teams. You might actually be one person that has multiple projects that are regulated differently if they are regulated. Or you just want to keep the account clean, so I've got my environment for application A just sitting there. Maybe different security controls and compliance rules around them. Or I really want the true billing separation between them. Might have two different teams that have completely different approaches to doing things. And rather than have them step on one another and kill each other's resources, they're all sitting in separate containers that are isolated and separated from one another, which again happens to be the account. But to achieve this at scale, we need to start thinking of ways to make sure that this is automated. How can I get every team that wants to be able to build something new, or every developer, to have an environment that they can just get started in? How do I make sure that they can go at any time and have it be able to scale? How do I go from days or hours to minutes to somebody gets spun up and being ready? And to do that, we want it to be self-service. Think of guardrails, not blockers. Traditional operations team, and to a certain extent security teams, it tends to be, the answer is no until you can prove how do you make it work the right way. But what if I can have the guardrails and things in place so I know when something does go wrong? To allow that innovation to happen and turn my security team and organization into a group that can actually build and put things in place to help manage and monitor the rest of the organization. And as you look through this model, you'll see that a lot of things are owned by the security team to help build that approach. But we also want that visibility. What happened? Who did what? When? Where did they come from? And most importantly, flexibility, because whatever you come up with today, I promise you will change a year from now, a few months from now in some cases. And being able to think through a flexible platform that helps us enable our business to move forward. I come from a software development background, and I do fundamentally understand the idea that if I open up my server to the whole world, to every possible IP address, it really does make it convenient to get things done. But if I tell that to any security person, they will kick me out of the room. But what if you have the guardrails and things in place that you know that? I remember when I first started at AWS, I opened up a Redshift cluster, public IP address, open to the internet, and I think within a few hours I got a ticket from our security team, which was terrifying because I had just started at the company, telling me I violated policy, go do something about it. And of course I went and I did. I didn't have any information on it other than some public data set that I loaded. But it allowed me to make the right decision and enabled me to be an owner in security and gave me those things in place. What if we can move toward that model? Now, I'm not promising you that I can give you that today, but this is the mental framework and things that we think about as we move forward. So a few things we do before we start: lock credentials for the root account, enable CloudTrail, guard duty to make sure we get security findings. We want to federate our accounts, so as people come in and leave, you have an existing process. So your existing directory, whether it's an Active Directory or, for those of you that hate Active Directory, LDAP, you have a way to authenticate and federate into the accounts that is from an identity provider. Think about the rules and things. Do I want all of my volumes to be encrypted? Do I want my S3 buckets to be encrypted? And how do I know if somebody does something wrong or they don't encrypt the bucket? Then from there, to establish that isolation, we've got a whole bunch of accounts and things to start thinking about. Again, think of it as that container space that we're talking about. Not to be confused with container that's associated with Docker, just this space that we can put together. So we start with the top of the hierarchy. The Organizations Master account should be owned by somebody who's responsible for the security of the organization. Sometimes it's a cloud center of excellence in conjunction with a security team, but it is an account that allows you to manage a whole number of other accounts within your organization. It should be limited resources, minimal things. You get consolidated bills go up there, and it is there to host your overall environment. You can deploy things like service control policies, which as of a few weeks ago, we've released the ability to do granular service control policies. But here's one that's just stops somebody from being able to disable CloudTrail. So we've got a log of the API calls happening within the account, and I want to block somebody from being able to stop that. I can put that service control policy at the master level, and it supersedes any privileges in the sub-accounts, even the root account. So nobody can go in and stop it. Or if I've got a production account, and I don't want anybody to have an internet gateway. It's an isolated VPC. I can add a policy like this. From there, we start thinking about the foundational building blocks that help our organization. We just happen to call those core accounts because we couldn't come up with a better name, and it makes sense. So these are the things that the rest of the organization depends on. And again, even if you're a small startup or you're a one-man shop, having that level of isolation helps make things easier down the line. And each one of these will match. They'll have their own development life cycle. So my shared services account isn't going to be just a production one and I only use that. But for the purpose of this, we're showing it as one box. Once I've established core, where do my security logs go? I want someplace isolated. I send them there, and we call that the log archive account. Your CloudTrail logs from every single account or every single place goes in there. It's a single source of truth. It's your security log, config logs. Some customers choose to start putting some application logs and things in there. But the golden rule is keep it so it's only hosting the logs. We're not putting compute. We're not putting log analysis. We're not putting any of that in that account. This is the single source of truth. If we want to do compute on it or do analysis, we'll give read-only access to the content from somewhere else, and it can go in and access it. In fact, if a user logs in, I would alarm on it, because that should not happen. Now that I have a place to store my logs, I go into my security account, And that's, again, owned by my security organization. And the goal is I need to be able to know what's going on in the rest of my environment. It's security logs going to the log archive. It might be connected to your data center if you've got a SIM on-prem and that's where you want to aggregate your findings, or if you've got tooling on-prem it needs to connect to. Your guard duty master, your findings, but it's also got a cross-account access into all your other accounts within AWS. Because you might have automated tooling running in place. Are there any security groups that are open to the world? Any volumes that are not encrypted? That alarm I got when I first started at AWS happened because there is a cross-account role sitting in my personal AWS account that an automated scan ran and detected that I created a Redshift cluster with a security group open to the world. And that's the model we're trying to go after, is how do I find these things as quickly as possible in an automated way as possible. Plus, there's a read-write role that allows you to affect changes. Should not be the way to log in as a human or a security practitioner. Again, that's a fail-safe mechanism. What if there's an issue? What if there's a compromise and I can't reach the owner of that account? It allows me to affect change if I need to, or it even allows me to make changes to policies and guardrails within that account down the line. Common things and tooling that I want to do, I go through shared services. When you start out, you might have one shared service. As over time, you might have 20. Common tooling and services that I need for my organization. Maybe my directory, maybe a golden AMI. Some customers have gone as far as created a separate account for their golden AMIs to be used by the rest of the organization, with subscription mechanism on it, so I know when a new one comes in and the development teams can pull in the latest one. Some customers go in and build a deployment pipeline for going cross accounts, and that becomes another one of the shared services. And in all of this, we're thinking in terms of the areas of responsibility of the people that own the accounts. We're matching the people that own things. When we talk about teams, it's the same concept. Maybe looking for limits or snapshot life cycles. Do I have snapshots from 3 years ago that nobody has looked at and I've got a snapshot every single day? Maybe I should clear out some older things. Limit monitoring, those kinds of things. Limited access to the team that owns that area of responsibility. Network, again, your network team is likely to be a different team from your central IT. Managing the network infrastructure, your direct connect goes there. Transit gateway would be managed there, allowing that level of isolation again to happen on the network side. And similar concept, log archive, things go there. By the way, we have this session was also done, at least these components were done at reInvent this past year, so there's a recording. I'm intentionally not going to go every single detail because there's a number of things later on I want to make sure that we get to. So for the 4 of you that raised your hands, I'll make this faster, don't worry. Developer sandboxes. They need to play, they need to learn, they need to figure things out. And I know this one sounds terrifying. Giving every single developer an account with full access and they can go play and get things done. But you treat it as a company resource, just like a company laptop. It's part of the HR process, onboarding for employees. There's a fixed spending limit on it. No more than $50 a month or $100 a month to learn and figure stuff out. And the reality is the people that want to sneak out the data, they can go set up an account with their Gmail account if they wanted to, and then put stuff up there. At least now you have visibility and it enables the organization to get started. It enables the developers to learn and figure things out. Disconnected from everything. This is not connected to your data center in any way. It is isolated. Its CloudTrail logs are still going into the log archive account, so at least you have that visibility and know what's going on, but it's isolated. They can play and learn and figure stuff out. And at least if they make big mistakes, they make them in a small account that's very isolated just to them. From there, I start thinking about my teams. Back to the idea of shared ownership and who owns what and who's responsible for things. So I start thinking about my team that has product X. And unlike one of our leaderships at Amazon, which is think big, in this case, we want to think small. What's the smallest unit that I can make this? So that this one team that owns this 1 or 2 services can go launch it and build it in there. and they can move forward with what they need to do. Again, in all of this, we're sending CloudTrail logs and everything in the right places, making sure those cross-account roles, the auditing and scanning and things are happening while these accounts are running. And for this, we just match our development lifecycle. We've got a development account for that particular team. If you have development alpha, beta, gamma, however many, you just match those. So we'll go developments, we'll go into pre-prod. These can be as many as you need for your development lifecycle. Similar concept, connected to where it needs to go. So shared services, because it might rely on directory services there. And it's connected to my pre-prod network on-prem. Production, similar concept. CloudTrail logs going, network connectivity to the right places. And hopefully, you're promoting things from pre-prod. I've tested it, validated, everything works. Now I can say it's going to go into production. Extremely limited access. In some cases, you could have the access only limited to a handful of people that are not even part of the application team, or the senior leaders on that team, to make sure that things are done. But largely, we want it to be automated. And if we can get to that point, it's another place that we reduce the potential area of human mistakes. Over time, as it becomes easier to create accounts and use them, and we have a process around it, we have things that just start to grow organically. Maybe there's a common set of data that a whole bunch of applications use. I can build a data lake around it, or build a few common services, and I can build a number of these team shared services. And if you extrapolate that a little bit further, the more accounts that get created, the more teams that are building it, you'll have this big mesh of interconnectivity between things as you offer services and resources for everybody to use. So for the beginning, not one I generally think about, but just know this is the progression down the line. And as it becomes easier to manage accounts and create them, it's no longer a decision point of should I create one or not. It's let's just create one, put it together. If we're not sure, let's just put one together. We got a new team member that came on board, hasn't used AWS before, just let's put a few accounts in there, let them play, get things done. And again, we're keeping an eye, we're making sure what it is. Traditionally, the problem been, how hard is it to manage this stuff? Okay. So your innovation pipeline ends up looking something like this. We got my developer accounts, maybe I decide to create a POC account. We're going to try something. And if it looks like it makes sense, got business approval on it, let's move it into the dev. And from there, go into pre-prod, prod, and follow the same process that we always have done. Or in some cases, I just go right from my developer account because I made a decision, I like it, it makes sense. Let's just go into dev and move forward. And finally, there will be exceptions. There will be special accounts. So other than just teams, what if I'm subject to PCI? It's much easier to go to an auditor and say, this account is my PCI, holds the credit card information. That's it. There's nothing else. Here's the set of people. So it helps with that isolation. And once again, reducing the blast radius. So by the end, we end up back to that diagram I asked you at the very beginning. We have production, we have non-prod, we're matching our development life cycle. We have core accounts that represent what we need. There might be other core accounts or things that you need, and over time these grow. You might find that you're going to create 2 or 3 log archive accounts. Some customers have said, their auditing team have said, well, log archive sounds great, everything's going there, but I want my own copy owned by my auditing team too. You'll pay double the money for the storage, but if that's what you have to have, that's another thing you can do there and have it copy directly right in there. And then some examples of the first teams that might make sense. Maybe a team to help manage your bills and cost optimization and make sure that you're buying the right reserved instances so that you're saving as much money as you can or minimizing your costs. Or if you've got an auditing team that has decided they do want their own copy of the logs, or even just want to run tooling to access the log archive logs so that they can determine if we've met some compliance rules or regulations. Again, they might have dev, pre-prod, prod as needed because they're building their tooling and things that you might want to check. Because of course, all of your auditing teams have full development teams that can do all of this stuff and get it done in an automated way. Or have I got an amazing new product or an idea? Same thing, match the development lifecycle, think small. What about my QA and staging? Traditionally, we talked about this whole idea of an account being a container, it's an isolation, but if I've got an orchestration framework around it that helps me spin up additional accounts or deploy guardrails en masse to all of these accounts, what if I have a mistake in that piece of code? What if I have a typo that denies access to all of S3? And I go deploy it to my production landing zone, and now I've shut down every single application across every single account that I have. We recommend a queue and staging landing zone environment too. This is not your development and production and pre-prod accounts for the individual teams. Those are sitting within the master one as always. This is the development and staging for the landing zone itself, the orchestration framework that controls all of this, which should be more tightly controlled in terms of development and deployment, but making sure that I can test those changes. And we establish a second landing zone, albeit a smaller one, but mirrors my master one, so that I can make changes to that orchestration framework without potentially breaking my entire organization. So if I were to go do this, and if we're going to build something around it, I start by defining a tagging strategy, my automation strategy, create my bunch of accounts, and get started. And there's a whole bunch of lists of things. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. Things to start thinking about if I'm establishing this environment. What do I do for each one of those accounts? For my log archive, enabling my MFA delete, enable versioning, limited access, setting all of that stuff up in place. And then for every single one of the accounts, there's a common checklist in addition to the individual things that you've seen there. You've seen it referenced in the last slide. Enabling MFA. Making sure that those logs I mentioned, my CloudTrail logs, are going to the right place in the log archive account. And up until a year and a half ago, this is kind of where my presentation would end. I would flip over to a customer and then tell you, go do it. But then we decided to take it a little bit further and help you get started in that process. So in 2018, we launched what we called the AWS Landing Zone solution, which, instead of taking you months to start building this and putting some foundational framework in place, we provided a CloudFormation template that creates a code pipeline that allows you to do those things. So it sets up the code pipeline. We've got a shared services account, log archive, security, the cross-account roles, configures the log archive account so that the logs from those security things are going there. Enables config, enables a number of guardrails, things like config rules that report on encryption. But most importantly, it creates what we called an account vending machine, which of course in Control Tower we decided to rename again, but we'll clarify all of that as we move forward. So it's an account vending machine whose function is, instead of using the AWS Organizations APIs directly to create an account, you make use of the account vending machine to create an account. And what it will do is it will go in and take care of that initial plumbing. If I create a new account through the account vending machine, my cross-account security roles that we spoke about, they get created. My CloudTrail gets configured from the moment it's created, and its logs going to the log archive account in addition to a local copy in its own account. So the developer, whoever's in that account, can view their own logs if they need to. Don't have to go to you to ask you for them. And they can't stop it because you put the SCP in place, so they can't stop it. And it sets up the connectivity to the shared VPC account, so that every new account and every new container that we've set up is already connected and ready to go. So back to that QA landing zone thing that we just spoke about, I would just launch 2 of these, one for testing and validating. This one, you get all the code. It's available. You talk to your account team to help you get access to it. The reason we chose not to publish it broadly is because it's a complex solution. It uses a number of services, and it's a bit more complex to get going. So we wanted to make sure to improve that experience and work with our customers to work through it to make it easier for them. So if you talk to your account team, they can work with you to get you access. There is no charge for this. It's available. And even if you've built your own landing zone already, or have started to, or you've got something you're happy with, but this does something a bit better or something you want to learn from, take it, try it out, do what you need to do with it. So if I go back to that list that I showed before, it starts to take away some of those things. Creates log archive, security, shared services, gives you the account vending machine so I can start creating developer sandboxes if I want, and it takes care of a number of things. Not everything, but it takes care of a number of things there, so it makes it easier to get started. And because you have the full code to it, you can customize, do anything you want to it, provided you have knowledge about 15 of our services and can go figure it out and learn from it. So it does require a certain amount of uplift. But we know customers that have spent months, if not years, trying to build something, and a significant amount of money to trying to launch these types of things. This helps you get started. So to give it a little bit more context, when I start thinking about this entire landing zone concept, that lowercase landing zone, what does it take to actually operate and build things in AWS? Got the account management aspect of it. Got things like account metadata. Who's the owner? What's the function of that account? What do I need to be protected in there? Is it subject to compliance program? What are those account level things I need to do? And policy deployment, enforcement, remediation, notification, all of those things are things that I need. Landing Zone starts to give you some SNS topics that you can potentially use. It gives you some config rules to help you do things like encrypted AWS, encrypted EBS volumes. And takes care of some of the policy deployment. Again, back to this idea, this does not give you everything yet. But it starts to do some of those things. And the areas pointed to are the things that it really does, and you start thinking through them. Yesterday you heard about AWS Control Tower. If you haven't, there's another session later today if you want to dive deeper into that one. There's one happening over there right now, but thank you for being here. How do I implement it? Now you've thought about Landing Zone, it's code, it's everything. Now we listen to our customers, they like Landing Zone, but it requires a good amount of complexity. And you need to know the code and you need to manage it and do it yourself. So we decided to build a managed service version of what Landing Zone is. And that's what Control Tower is. It solves the same problem, except it does it as a managed service. So you go into the account, launch it, provided the right limits are in place, and it goes. Creates log archive, creates a security account, although in there we call it audit. Does not create shared services at this point. Instead of setting up an account vending machine, we call it account factory. So it's the same function. I can go in and set this up. So log archive, audit account, it's a pre-configured secure environment, and enables guardrails and governance, and you can define things. It comes with 30 guardrails. So I can get started and I can play with it and I can try it out. It needs to be launched in a new account. You cannot launch it in an existing one. In fact, you cannot have enabled organizations on that account yet. If you have, it will not work. And it will do that check, so don't try and cheat. But you can try it today. It's a free service. You only pay for the resources it launches. And if you look at the FAQ page and the pricing page, we have some examples of how much it would actually cost you if you launch it using certain configurations. But think of it as a managed service version of the AWS Landing Zone solution. So you get to enable, you set up a landing zone, you have the centralized identity, so it uses SSO. So back to that idea of federation that we talked about, using IAM is not as easy to manage. But if I've got a single provider for my identity, single sign-on, whether it's a directory, Landing Zone sets it up by using an Active Directory. Here it uses AWS SSO. And we'll dive a little bit deeper into one versus the other and when to choose one versus the other. But for now, Control Tower only supports SSO. So it becomes harder to integrate with additional ones. Puts guardrails in place and automates the checking around them. And one unique feature that it has that Landing Zone does not have is it actually gives you a dashboard of findings and what's happening in there. How many OUs do you have? Number of accounts? How many preventive guardrails, detective guardrails? It's a security conference, but I assume most of you, preventive are things you're stopping people from doing. Detective are things you really can't stop, but you want to detect that they happen and get notification. So it builds those things in place. And you can have a dashboard. And back to that aggregation problem I described earlier, starting to bring things together so I can start looking at it. Use that in combination with Security Hub, and you can start having a centralized place to look at these findings and working through them. Use Account Factory to launch new accounts and provision them to people. And you know what's going on by looking through it. Got a dashboard visibility, built-in identity, monitoring, notification, all of it built in. And as of yesterday, it has gone GA, so feel free to go try it, play with it, see what it does, how it works. Attend the session later today if you're not flying home, where they're going to dive deeper into this with a whole demo and everything. And if we finish here early enough, you might be able to see the demo over there. So back to that same list that we did before, similar things. The only thing it does not do, it does not create the shared services account. But you can go spin up an account with the Account Factory or iterate on it, and depending on what decision you make, where you want to go, it might have shared services in there in the next iteration. So let's look at it in context. Similar diagram to before. We've got all of this metadata stuff, everything that we have, policy deployment, remediation, and again, similar things that it takes care of. It has a dashboard, but I don't have a reporting dashboard on here. That'll be for the next version of the presentation. But similar concept. You still have to think about the account metadata. How do I know what sits in what account? It also, unlike Landing Zone, starts to take care of that bigger circle, which is a collection of guardrails. Whereas Landing Zone does individual guardrails, Control Tower, you can define a template around a set of guardrails and start making use of that, which we call a blueprint. So, anyone have this question? Which one do I go with? So I tried to put together a list of things to start thinking about. Some of the pros, some of the cons, what they look like. So Landing Zone, it's a CloudFormation deployment. I deploy it, there's about 15 services or so, and it takes care of it. There's a code pipeline. If I need to make an update, you need to download the code, make updates, and relaunch it. Control Tower, it's a managed service. You have no idea what your code is. We take care of it. You just launch it and it goes. Landing Zone, you have the code. You can do whatever you want. You could name it non-landing zone for anything, for all I care. You can do whatever you want with it because you've got full control and full code and infinite customization because you get to do it. But if you do that, you have to maintain it. And that might be a perfectly viable option for many customers who have the staff and expertise to do this. Control Tower, there's a set of fixed blueprints right now. Most regions are supported, as long as there are services there that we're using that are supported. So commercial regions are all supported except for GovCloud and China, because the underlying services in some of those are not available. Account structure, complete flexibility. Again, you have the code. You can do what you want. Control Tower is more opinionated. There's 2 non-configurable core accounts, no shared services, and no VPC is being launched. Landing Zone does take care of the VPC. Landing Zone is complex, and it does require a significant amount of expertise to get it to work. And to troubleshoot it, sometimes you have to look through a whole bunch of logs to figure out what happened. Control Tower, self-service. There's a GUI that you can just click and get things done. There is no API as of right now. So these are some of the decision points. Which one do I want to go with? If I've already got an existing landing zone in place that works for you and does what you need, maybe it makes sense to stay with it. I'll wait for the clapping. What if I have landing zone today? Or what if I'm afraid to use AWS Landing Zone because I'm afraid if I use it, then I miss out on Control Tower and I want to maybe be able to use it later. The service team has committed that you will be able to migrate existing accounts at some point down the line. We'll come out with better guidance around what should you do and not do within landing zone-based implementations to help with Control Tower. And this, by the way, is right out of the FAQ that we have on our public website. So even if at some point you decide that landing zone is what you want, but are hesitant because you don't want to maintain it down the line, there will be a migration path. So which one should you choose? Think about Control Tower and its capabilities. Does it meet what you need today? And if it doesn't quite meet it, but you want to get started with it and grow with the environment, then go with Control Tower. If you don't have the people that can manage the complexity of managing a landing zone, using that solution with the services and being able to troubleshoot and change things, start with Control Tower and move forward. Do you have an existing landing zone today that meets your needs? You might not want Control Tower or landing zone. Just continue to use it and see if Control Tower evolves to get to the point where it meets what you want. Do you need the full customization, full control over everything? Then go with the AWS Landing Zone solution. And I promise to give you a little bit more context to help you understand the bigger picture around everything that we're doing. So back in 2016, this is what multi-account strategy looked like. And because I drew that diagram personally, it does not look very good, unlike the one that you saw earlier, which shows you the nicer version of it. And if you notice, it's similar. We have a security account, there's no log archive. Back then we were telling you put the logs in the security account. And then a year later we decided it makes more sense to separate it out. We don't have teams, we have BUs, which of course, because we mentioned business units, customers went and put their entire business units into accounts that had hundreds or thousands of users and hit every possible limit imaginable. Not only that, we've had some instances where customers had somebody go in and close down their entire account because somebody was just playing and doing something with it. So here's where we are today. We started out with the security and governance approach. Everything you see in multi-account strategy was done with a group of security experts within AWS that have worked with a number of customers to come out with what makes sense as a pattern. So we decided to give out guidance. And we started that back in 2015, 2016. Then from there, we wanted to provide you a way to do an implementation. And the way to implement it was an SA or a professional services or a partner advising you on what you might want to do given that possible framework. Then from there, we wanted to think about infrastructure operations and application operations. So from a guidance perspective, you had the multi-account strategy, which for reInvent 2016 and 2017, we ran multiple sessions to help customers think through that. 2018, we used the landing zone name, but it was the same thing, architecting security and governance across your landing zone. Then we decided in early 2018 to give you some implementation, which was the AWS Landing Zone. But many of our customers might have built their own landing zone already. Some may not like it or maybe they love what they have and they use it all the time. So they might have built one, whether it's based on the multi-account strategy or their own things. We came out with AWS Landing Zone, which implements the multi-account strategy best practices. And now Control Tower, built on the landing zone build and that same guidance to make things happen. Then you want to think about your infrastructure. How do I operate it? Could be your operations team, it could be a managed services provider, and they manage any of those things. If you've got a managed services provider, they're probably managing their own custom-built partner landing zone on your behalf and allowing you to make use of it. Or you can use AMS, which is an Amazon managed service that takes care of infrastructure operations. Then, from an application operations perspective, I didn't draw the arrows because it would have been very full. If I've got my infrastructure taken care of, what about my application side? Again, that could be your operations team you have today, managed service provider, or, as many of you know, DevOps or DevSecOps to start thinking through this. And for many enterprises, going into DevOps is not what happens on day one. That takes a long time if you ever get there. But it starts to inspire some ideas. And if DevSecOps, what if every time somebody checks in a piece of code before they go to production, there's validation checks that the security team does in an automated manner to get things done? So as I mentioned, if you want to learn a bit more about Control Tower, there's a session later today, 5 to 6 p.m., right over there. There's one that you just missed. I am sorry about that, but it'll be recorded. But if you want to attend their session later today, or if you want to run over there and ask some questions, pretend you were attending, you can go do that. I wanted to get some feedback from you. Don't worry, I'm not keeping you here for long. This is a list of things that we're starting to think about offering guidance to our customers on, and naturally at some point starting to implement. Things like, how do I set up my service control policies? Identity federation, possible ways to do it. Networking, do I use transit gateway, VPC peering, shared VPC, private link? There's a lot of options. What about my CI/CD? How do I do my publishing and deployment pipelines? What about alerting and recommendations? Forensics landing zone. So, when you fill out the survey, if you can remember this list, or at least one thing that you would like to see us do, just put it in, the things to you that matter, that make more sense for you, that you think would like us to put guidance in. We'll be meeting later this summer to start putting a number of this stuff together, to start publishing out to our customers, to help you understand. And naturally, this will feed into our product development and eventually, what do we put out there? But at least helping our customers understand what do we see broadly, what are the best practices. So feel free to do that. So thank you all for joining. Thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it.